The party should have felt like a celebration. 32 years my father spent working as a civil engineer for the same firm, and they threw him a retirement dinner at the Marriott on 5th, with a slideshow and a cake shaped like a blueprint. My mother cried twice before the appetizers even arrived. I wore a green dress because my father once told me green was the color of new beginnings, and I wanted him to see that I believed this next chapter would be something good. I was standing near the bar with a glass of sparkling water when she approached me. I didn't know her name yet. She was in her late 50s, silver hair pulled back neatly, wearing the kind of composed expression that told me she had rehearsed what she was about to say and was still deciding whether to say it. "You're Rebecca," she said, not a question. "I am. Your father talks about you, the one in Chicago." She paused. "The accountant." "Forensic accountant," I said, the way I always do when someone makes it sound like I count beans for a living. She nodded slowly. "I'm Patricia Holt. I run HR for the firm. I've known your father for 20 years. She glanced across the room toward where my father stood, laughing with his old colleague from the Portland office, completely unaware that anything was happening. Then she looked back at me. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to stay calm when I do." I set my glass down on the bar. "Has your brother Daniel spoken to you recently about your father's finances?" The question landed strangely. Daniel was 3 years older than me, lived 40 minutes from our parents in Connecticut, and had recently taken on what my mother called helping Dad get organized after my father mentioned some confusion with his online banking. I had thought nothing of it. Daniel was the responsible one, the one who showed up, the one who stayed close while I built a career in another state. "He mentioned he was helping him with some paperwork," I said carefully. Patricia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "About 6 weeks ago, your father came into the office to update his pension beneficiary form. Routine. But when our payroll administrator processed it, she noticed something off about the notarization on a secondary document he submitted at the same time. A durable power of attorney." She looked at me directly. The notary stamp was from a firm in Bridgeport that closed in 2019. I felt the air change in the room, or maybe just in my lungs. "I tried to raise it with your father directly," Patricia continued, "but he got confused during the conversation. And then Daniel called the office the next morning and explained that your father had early onset memory issues and that all communication should go through him going forward." She folded her hands. "That's when I stopped making calls and started keeping records." She pressed a business card into my hand with her personal cell number written on the back in blue ink. "I'm sorry to do this tonight," she said, "but I've been waiting for the right moment for 3 weeks. You were the right moment." I stood at that bar for 4 minutes after she walked away. I watched my father accept a plaque from his department head and tear up a little, and I watched my brother Daniel stand beside him with one hand on his shoulder, smiling the comfortable smile of a man who believes he has already won. I drove to my parents' house that night after the dinner. My mother went to bed early, tired, and happy the way she always was after a long emotional evening. My father fell asleep in his chair watching the 11 o'clock news. And I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started doing what I do. I am very good at following money. I started with the publicly accessible records. Connecticut property filings, court records, UCC filings, nothing alarming at first glance. Then I called in a favor from a colleague at a compliance firm who owed me one, and by 2 a.m. I had a clearer picture of several accounts linked to my father's social security number that I had never seen before. There was a joint savings account my father apparently opened 14 months ago at a credit union in Norwalk. The primary account holder was listed as my father. The secondary holder was my brother's wife, Karen. The balance at opening had been transferred from my father's primary savings account at his bank of 30 years. The amount was $214,000. The current balance in the Norwalk account was $6,800. I closed the laptop and sat very still in my parents' kitchen, listening to my father snore softly in the next room, and I understood exactly what I was looking at. Over the next 4 days, I did not call Daniel. I did not change my behavior at Sunday dinner. Did not look at Karen differently when she refilled the bread basket and talked about her sister's upcoming baby shower. I smiled. I asked about their kids. I said the pot roast was wonderful. I have spent enough years in depositions and fraud investigations to know that the worst thing you can do when you suspect someone is let them know you're looking. Back in Chicago, I requested a full transaction history subpoena through a contact at a federal financial crimes task force I had worked with the year before. It took 11 days. What came back made me sit down on my apartment floor and stay there for a while. The Norwalk account had been opened with a power of attorney document, the same one with the fraudulent notary stamp Patricia had flagged. Over the following 14 months, my father's savings had been moved in increments small enough to avoid automatic fraud triggers. 11,000 here, 8,000 there, 6,000 on a Tuesday morning when my parents were at a doctor's appointment. The money flowed from the credit union account to an LLC registered in Delaware under a name I didn't recognize at first. Coastal Property Ventures. Coastal Property Ventures had one member listed on its operating agreement, Karen's maiden name. I called Patricia Holt on a Wednesday evening. She picked up on the second ring. "How much did you keep?" I asked. She didn't ask what I meant. Copies of everything I told you about. The original POA submission, the notary details, the call log from Daniel the morning after. A pause. "There's one more thing. Your father came in alone about 2 months before the party. He seemed clearer than usual. He told Linda at the front desk he was worried someone was moving his money. He said he'd asked Daniel about it, and Daniel told him he was confused." Another pause. Linda wrote it down in a notes log she keeps. "I have it. Don't send anything electronically," I said. "Can you courier physical copies to me this week?" "Already addressed," she said. "I was waiting for your call." That night I sat with everything spread across my dining table and thought about my brother. We had grown up in the same house. He taught me to ride a bike. He drove 2 hours in a snowstorm to help me move into my first apartment. I thought about whether there was an explanation I was missing, some arrangement my parents had agreed to that I simply didn't know about. I spent an hour trying to build an innocent version of what I was looking at. I couldn't. I called my contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit on a Thursday. Her name was Agent Sandra Okafor, and she had worked with me on a municipal pension fraud case 2 years earlier. I told her I had a potential elder financial exploitation case with forged legal instruments. She told me to send what I had, and she'd call me Friday morning. She called Thursday night. "Where's the subject located?" she asked, which told me everything I needed to know about how the documents looked. The next step was the one I had been dreading. I drove back to Connecticut on a Saturday morning, and I sat down with my mother before my father woke up. I told her I needed to talk to her about something before I told her that I loved her and that whatever happened next, she and Dad were going to be okay. She listened the way my mother always listens to hard things, with her hands folded in her lap and her face very still, like she is bracing for impact but refusing to show it. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I wondered," she finally said. It came out barely above a whisper. "The overdraft notice last spring. Daniel said it was a bank error." I believed him. She looked out the window. "He's my son." "I know." She turned back to me. Her eyes were dry but barely. "You're sure?" "Mum, I'm sure." She nodded once. "Then do what needs to be done." My father was harder. He has always been harder, not because he is cold, but because he is proud. He spent 3 decades providing for his family, and the idea that someone had reached into the life he built and quietly stolen from it while he was losing his grip on the details. I watched him go through every stage in about 40 minutes. Confusion first, then the specific shame of a man who realizes he was fooled, then something colder that settled behind his eyes when I said Daniel's name the second time. He said very little. He asked one question: "Does he need money that badly?" I told him what I had found about Karen's LLC, about the real estate deals it appeared to have funded, about the 2 properties in South Carolina now titled under a holding company that traced back to their family. I told him it wasn't desperation. It was calculation. My father looked out the same window my mother had looked out an hour before and said quietly, he watched me not remember things and he decided that was an opportunity. I didn't answer because there was nothing to say to that. Agent Okafor's office executed a financial warrant and began formal interviews the following week. They moved quietly for another 3 weeks while additional documentation was gathered. I cooperated with everything they needed. Patricia Holt cooperated. Linda from the front desk provided her handwritten notes log. A forensic document examiner confirmed the notary stamp on the POA had been digitally reproduced from a stamp belonging to a notary who had retired and surrendered her commission in 2021 and had never notarized anything related to my father. Daniel and Karen were arrested on a Tuesday morning at their house while their kids were at school. I know this because Agent Okafor called me as a courtesy to let me know it was happening. I was at my desk in Chicago looking at an unrelated spreadsheet, and I set my phone down afterward and stared at the wall for about 10 minutes. My brother called me from his attorney's office 4 hours later. I didn't answer. He called twice more that day. I didn't answer those either. He left one voicemail, and I listened to it once, and in it he did not apologize. He explained. He talked about the pressure they had been under, the business venture that went badly, the debt they'd accumulated, the way he had convinced himself he would pay it back before anyone noticed. He said Karen had pushed for it, and he hadn't been strong enough to say no. He said he never wanted to hurt Dad. I deleted the message. There is a version of grief that comes from losing someone who is still alive. I had not known about that kind until that Tuesday. My brother was not dead. He was in a conference room in Hartford with an attorney, trying to figure out the shape of his consequences, and I was mourning something that could not be recovered regardless of what the courts decided. The indictment came down 6 weeks later. Daniel was charged with elder financial exploitation, forgery of a legal instrument, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Karen faced the same charges plus 2 additional counts related to the LLC structure and the property transactions. Their attorney entered not guilty pleas and requested a trial date. The trial lasted 8 days. My parents sat in the gallery on the first day and the last day. My mother wore the same gray blazer both times. My father wore his good watch, the one he used to wear to client presentations, and he sat very straight and did not look at my brother, except when the prosecutor asked him to identify who he was speaking about in his testimony. Then he looked at Daniel directly and answered the question clearly and sat back down. I testified for 2.5 hours on the 4th day. I walked the jury through the financial trail the same way I walk any jury through a financial trail, starting from the most basic concept and building to the specific, making sure no one was lost at any step. I have done this many times. It was the first time I had ever done it while trying not to think about the person sitting at the defense table. Daniel's attorney argued that my father had consented to the arrangements, that the memory issues had made him suggestible but not incapacitated, that the POA had been explained to him at a time when he understood what he was signing. The argument collapsed under the weight of the forensic document analysis, the fraudulent notary stamp, and my father's own testimony about the conversation at the firm, where he had told Linda he was worried about his money. Karen's attorney tried a different approach, arguing that she had been following her husband's direction and had limited knowledge of the source of funds entering the LLC. The wire fraud counts, and the specific evidence of her direct management of the LLC accounts made that argument difficult to sustain. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Daniel was convicted on all 4 counts. Karen was convicted on all 6. Sentencing was 3 months later. Daniel received 9 years. Karen received 6. The court also entered a restitution order requiring the liquidation of both South Carolina properties and all proceeds from the LLC, with full restitution to my parents. My parents were in the courtroom for sentencing. My father did not react when the judge read the numbers. My mother held his hand and looked straight ahead. I drove them home afterward. It was October, and the trees along Route 44 were doing what Connecticut trees do in October, which is turn colors, so extravagant they look almost implausible, like a landscape designed by someone who had never been told to be subtle. My father looked out the window the whole drive and said nothing for a long time. About 20 minutes from home, he said, "He was a good boy for a long time." My mother looked at her hands. "I want to remember that," my father said. "I'm allowed to remember that." Neither of us said anything. He was right. He was allowed to remember that. We had dinner at their house, the 3 of us, which had not happened since I was young. My mother made chicken and rice from a recipe her mother gave her, the one she always made when things were hard. My father ate 2 full servings and told a story about a bridge project he worked on in 1996 that I had heard before but listened to again like it was new. Somewhere in the middle of the story he laughed, a real laugh, and the sound of it filled the kitchen in a way that made my chest hurt with something I didn't have a word for. After dinner I sat on the back porch in the October cold while my parents did the dishes together, their voices quiet and overlapping through the window, the way they have talked to each other for 40 years. I thought about what my father had said in the car. He was a good boy for a long time. I thought about whether it was possible to hold 2 true things at the same time, that Daniel had been a good brother, and that Daniel had done something calculated and cruel to a man whose memory was failing and who trusted him, and whether carrying both of those things would always feel this heavy, or whether it would eventually compress into something smaller and easier to carry. I didn't know the answer yet. What I knew was that my father would turn 67 in February, and that my mother still made chicken and rice when things were hard, and that the restitution process was already underway, and that when my father had stood up in the courtroom and answered the prosecutor's question, clearly, and sat back down without looking away, I had felt something in him that I recognized. Not peace exactly, not anger. Something more like the satisfaction of a man who has spent his life building things that last, standing in the wreckage of something, and deciding to build again. I also knew that Patricia Holt had done something that took more courage than she would ever admit. I called her the evening after sentencing and thanked her. She said she had only done what anyone would do. I told her that was not true, because I know from my work exactly how many people see something wrong and decide it is not their problem. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Your father was kind to me when I went through my divorce 14 years ago. He didn't make a fuss about it, he just treated me like a person who was going through something hard. People remember things like that." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. My father remembered things too, when they were the right things. The green dress for new beginnings, the bridge project in 1996, the way a retirement party should feel. He was losing some things, yes. But some things he was keeping, and some things were being given back. I drove back to Chicago 2 days later. The trees on the highway were still burning with color. I turned the radio off and drove in silence for a while. Not because I was sad exactly, but because some things deserved to happen in quiet. There would be more paperwork, there would be the restitution proceedings and the property liquidation, and the slow bureaucratic process of untangling everything my brother had wound together over 14 months. I would be part of that. I was good at that part. But that morning, for just a little while, I let it be quiet. I let the trees do what they were doing. I let my parents be in their house in Connecticut with their 40 years and their chicken and rice. I let my father be a man who remembered what he wanted to remember. And I let myself be just his daughter, driving home in October, with the particular kind of tired that comes not from losing a fight but from finishing one.